I'm Grant. This is the Bird Emergency. I'm joined this afternoon by Sarah Comer. And Sarah is involved in a number of effort to preserve really critically endangered birds in a special part of Australia, the southwest corner of Western Australia, and the birds in question: noisy scrubbird, Western Ground Parrot, Western Whipbird, and the Western Bristlebird. So there's probably more, but that's where we're going to start. Sarah, welcome. How are you?
Oh, very well, thanks, Grant. Yeah, and hopefully it's not quite as wet in your part of the world as it is here.
Just as we've been chatting, it's gone from being a little bit wet to being very wet outside my window, so hopefully people can't hear it so much. Sarah, it's been a long time coming that we've been back and forwarding about getting this chat going, and that's because it's sometimes not easy to speak to people from government departments because there's a whole framework of who can talk about what and what has to be said. So I'm really glad that you have been able to join us. But tell us what your role is with I'm going to call it the Department of Conservation in Western Australia, but it's actually got a different title. Tell me.
It has. It's currently the Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions. You're responsible for looking after the conservation reserve system and working with threatened species and ecological communities across the state. And actually, I must apologise because I was actually given approval to talk to you last year, but we've been out and about. It's been a fairly hectic 9 months, I think, since I got that approval. So it was nothing to do with the bureaucracy at all.
But let's talk a little bit about that. And actually, I want to talk about the department name. Usually when we talk about Department of Conservation or Environment, in most jurisdictions, it's a hugely compromised department because they tend to put logging and mining in with, and often planning in with conservation. And they put it all together, and you've got these things that would seem to be mutually exclusive, but they're all trying to operate together. Now, attractions in the Western Australian sense, does that mean tourism?
Yeah,
okay.
It does.
It seems to be there's synergy between how your department is organised. So I'm giving that a big tick compared to over here where we've got the Minister for Conservation saying, we're really concerned about all these animals and birds that live in our mountain forests. And at the same time, I'm the Minister for cutting the forest down. Yeah. Bonkers.
Yeah, I think we're probably quite fortunate, and even more so on the south coast where we're not even in an area that's part of the state's logging, which is actually coming to an end anyway. So yeah, definitely the attractions is the places that people love. People love to go. Rottnest, Kings Park, the national parks that are everybody's back garden and make people feel so good.
So let's locate that area that we're talking about for you, and it's that southwest corner of Western Australia, for want of a better term. And let me pull this up so we get a map up as well and share that. Yeah. So we're looking at this bit down the bottom here.
Okay, so I'm actually on the south coast. So, the southwest proper, which is Margaret River and Manjimup and that part of the world, isn't part of the region I work in, but around Albany, which is where you are now.
Which is where I'm moving cursor down there. So that's the region we're talking about. When I talk about Two People's Bay, now this is Margaret River, isn't it?
On the Capes, on the west.
Okay, so when we're talking about Two People's Bay, which one of these land management units are we talking about?
The first one with the little blips on the south coast. So go to your right.
This one. Right.
So that's so that's the Albany area, and then we work right the way out to the east, where you can see the little dots off the coast. So that's all of that.
Okay, so that's it. So when I do the web page for this episode, I'll be able to clarify it better. But if you're watching now, you'll see where my cursor is going around. That's the region that we're focusing on. Okay, so good. We're out of there. I'll come back over here. There we are. Sarah, we're going to talk about the noisy scrubbird, which I was really familiar with as a kid because it was always in Australia's wildlife heritage, always featured in that as being one of the rarest birds in Australia. The Western Ground Parrot wasn't so much in focus back then, and we're talking the 70s I'm talking about. When did the Western Ground Parrot become a real focus of concern for the conservation efforts in Western Australia?
It was in the early 2000s, and I think probably one of the important points is to make the connection between the work that was done on the scrubbird and ground parrots, which effectively had the same recovery team from the early 1990s. And when we looked at using a similar translocation strategy to build new populations of ground parrots in the early 2000s, we suddenly realised that we had a bit of an issue with the population having crashed in the area that we were looking at as a source. And so that was really when the alarm bells started ringing for Western ground parrots in Western Australia, and we launched very quickly into a project to try and work out what was going on and what we could do about it. But if you actually think about it, the decline and the loss of known populations was pretty dramatic. From 2004, we lost the birds in the Waichinnacup area. They had declined in the Fitz, which is where we were going to catch birds for a translocation to reintroduce them in the western part of their range, so west of Albany. And then we'd actually had trouble finding them in Cape Arid. In 20 years, things had gone from being just status quo to a lot of alarm bells were ringing for ground parrots.
Can I ask you about that? In 2004 was the time you mentioned?
Yep.
How many known locations and populations were there about that time? And what do you know what the estimated population number was?
Yeah, so I should actually say that it's very hard to be about population numbers, but
it's a really cryptic bird. It lives in places where there are not a lot of people, and it's like what I was just mentioning with Holly in the earlier show. Sometimes all these records of birds that people say, oh, that's really weird that it's turned up here. I'm not so sure that it's really that weird. There's more people looking at birds now than there were 30 years ago. So people now are going, oh, that's a bristlebird, whereas they would have been going brown bird.
When we were pulling together the South Coast Threatened Birds Recovery Plan, and we were actually reviewing the ground parrot, in the early 2000s, we were estimating that we had around 380, 400 birds. And I guess you mentioned, how cryptic they are. You can only reliably hear them before the sun comes up and after the sun goes down. They're not often seen, even though they're strong flyers. They spend most of their time on the ground. But at that point in time, we knew their range had contracted significantly since European settlement, and they were only able to be reliably heard along the south coast east of Albany. But effectively, we went from having 3 known populations to, in that period of time, from 2003 to 2012, and that was the Cape Arid ones that we managed to relocate in the early 2000s.
And how big, I don't want to use that term, how small was that population at that time, do you think, that remaining population?
Pretty small, and that's where our estimates of 100 to 150 birds or less than came from. We were pretty confident. When you're standing in the middle of it, you have a reasonable degree of confidence that you're listening to maybe 2 birds or 4 birds. But I guess if you think about the remoteness and the vastness of areas like Cape and the adjoining Neutzland Nature Reserve, actually having people able to detect birds across that landscape is pretty tricky. We had a couple of big bushfires that pushed birds into the unburnt refuges, and that allowed us to think that we were probably looking at around 100, 120 birds at most at that point in time.
So with the reduction since white settlement and taking from the early 2000s or probably let's push that back a little bit further, but at least 3 populations, distinct populations, and perhaps 300-odd birds, down to 1 population and only sub-200 birds.
Yeah.
Best guesses. What do you think has been the main cause of that decline? Was it land use and people encroaching on habitat, or has it been feral animals, feral pests, or fire, or a combination of all of those things? What's your best guess?
Our best guess is certainly a combination. And if you think about the extensive clearing that went on in the first couple of 100 years after colonisation, and then regimes are altered, and then, of course, the introduction of foxes and cats. So probably multiple causal factors. But the interesting thing with our decision to focus on cats was that the monitoring in the Fitzgerald River National Park of ground parrots showed a really positive response to the introduction of fox baiting in 1996, where the calling activity actually increased, and you think that's a really effective control. And then there was a couple of small fires within ground parrot habitat. Population was still looking pretty good, and then there's this dramatic decline, and we worked out that it was quite likely a mesopredator release of feral cats in that landscape. So any suppression of feral cats by foxes was actually allowing cat numbers to explode, so that we had a very high density. And for a ground feeding, ground nesting bird, that's a major problem.
Now, you just referred to a release of mesopredator, being the cat. Was that actually, do you think that was a deliberate release, like someone or dumping cats, or is that a natural spread of the feral cat population just extending through?
In the FITS, the mesopredator release is explained by removing a predator. You take foxes out of the system and there's actually nothing pressing cats. But we know in other areas where ground parrots declined, there are certainly issues with dumping kittens and cat disappearing from adjoining farms, or having a very easy resource in that sort of space on farms adjoining remnant vegetation. So it's in the western part of the South Coast, that's probably been a major issue. And one of the things that we used to do a lot of work with volunteers in the Waichinukup area, monitoring ground parrots, where in 1999, 2000, you could go out there any night of the week and hear ground parrots calling. But every night that we were out listening and we'd drive home, we'd actually see cats crossing the road, there was obviously very high numbers there, and that was quite likely a combination of dumping close to major towns and also refuse situations where they were doing very well. Yeah, so a challenge.
I want to ask you something controversial, but I don't know whether you're going to be able to answer it. So I'm going to make a statement, and you can ignore it, or you can. I think in Australia we're long past the point where we need to have cats as pets. I think we now know that the risk to our unique wildlife in this country is, apart from habitat destruction, cats are the next big problem. And the benefit and the joy and the right of humans to enjoy having a domestic animal doesn't come close to the importance of preserving the birds and animals that they're wiping out. That's my view. It's time to end domestic cats in this country. And by end, let's stop adding to the population and let's all find another pet to have.
Yeah, perhaps. There's also some pretty strong evidence that people can still enjoy having their little moggies curled up on their laps and be responsible about it. And I guess that's the
reason I've changed my opinion is that say you've got 40,000 wonderfully responsible cat owners, but you have 10 idiots who dump kittens. 10 people, the damage that they can do over a 50-year time span. And where do they dump them? They don't dump them in heavily urbanised areas. They drive out to the bush so no one will see them. So the sort of risk-reward equation for me, just learning what I've learned, like with talking to Judy, and the data is there about how much damage one cat does.
Yep.
And one cat amongst this area where we know there are a couple of hundred ground parrots can reduce that, certainly can reduce the recruitment to zero, because it can take every nestling, and it could probably reduce the population by half or more, which means genetically it can probably become unviable. Does the same damage as killing all of them.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree. And I've actually spent a lot of time sorting through cat stomachs in the last 5 years. And the damage they do just in one meal is fairly overwhelming. I guess we just have to be a little bit careful about being seen as anti-cats.
Yeah,
Our role
I'm
is
not
conservation.
I'm not anti-cat and I'm not anti-pet.
Yeah.
But I think now, I mean, in Australia, and I think anyone who lives on an island as well has got the same issues about what's the benefit of having a cat compared to the potential damage it can do. And you can be a fantastic cat owner, but the person next door who got given a kitten that once it's grown up, or even once it stops being cute, they don't really want it anymore. And what does it cost to take it to the vet and have it humanely euthanized? It's a lot more than driving out to the country and throwing it out the window, which is what they do.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with you. It's really important, but it is controversial, and I guess that's where you need to actually. I mean, my job is about conservation of wildlife, and cats are absolutely horrendous in that space. So yeah.
And it's a conversation that we're not having as a community, which is, and I understand that it takes a long time to change attitudes and all that, but we don't have a long time for a lot of these birds, and certainly a lot of our mammals. We don't have a long time.
No,
that's what I was saying. Yeah. So let's talk about these locations that the ground parrot is existing. How many of these locations are they sharing with the noisy scrubbird and the western bristlebird and the western whipbird? Are these locations fundamentally important for all of these species, or a combination of any of them?
So in terms of the range, until 2004, you could go to Waichinukup and hear, or perhaps even see if you were lucky, all four. So ground parrots, scrubbirds, whipbirds, bristlebirds. There's still whipbirds, bristlebirds and scrubbirds there in good numbers. Loss of the ground parrots in the early 2000s put the mockers on that. The scrubbird is actually only found in the Two People's Bay, Many Peaks, Waichinukup area. So that's still got a very restricted distribution on the south coast. Bristlebirds and whipbirds are found from there across to the Fitzgerald River National Park. And then the whipbirds up into the Stirlings and some of the smaller wheatbelt remnant reserves. So there's a really nice overlap, and that's where that having a single recovery team looking after all of them became a really important strategy for conservation and helping to guide the conservation work.
Before we go into the recovery team and the specific works and programs that have been going, and we've got some lovely pictures to look at, let's talk about the scrubbird and set the scene a little bit too. Going back to when I was reading the Australian Wildlife Heritage as a 10-year-old, so we're talking early, mid-70s. I think they were talking about only maybe 20 or 30 of the birds being in Two People's Bay. What's the state of play now in population, and how has it changed maybe over the last decade or two? That, again, it's best guessed, isn't it? Because do we really know?
Well, it's it's one of those conservation programs that's been certainly hailed as a success from rediscovery in 1961, and certainly very much putting Two People's Bay on the map and in the conservation reserve system. When the first census was done in the mid-60s, they actually had around 50 territorial males, and with the scrubbirds we're quite lucky because they occupy the same territories from year to year, and so we can actually get a population index by counting that marvellous song of the male. And so we've actually tracked certainly Two People's Bay, but also the bigger population that extends over Many Peaks and on Bald Island. So we've actually got good monitoring data since the mid-60s, and our last complete count of territorial males, we're estimating that a total population size was around 2,000 birds. So that's pretty exciting, and it's a great recovery story because they've done quite well. But we are still looking at scrubbirds being restricted very much to that one small landscape around 30,000 hectares. So it's still on the edge, and the nature of the scrubbird, it's a Gondwanan relic. It needs those deep leaf litter with invertebrates and good cover because it's functionally flightless, it's not going to disperse out of that habitat without a little bit of help from us. And so far, we haven't established them anywhere outside of that Albany management area.
So if, and this is in the conversation a little bit further, but if you are able to have predator-free habitat, if all of the suitable habitat, this is probably the best way to ask it, if all of the suitable habitat was predator-free, how big is that area? Like, how much further could the birds be dispersed than they are now? Are we talking hundreds of thousands of hectares of suitable habitat still existing?
Yeah, there probably is. That's an interesting question to put an area on it, but there's certainly plenty of potential habitat throughout the forest regions associated with the granites. The introduced predators are certainly a problem, and as is fire, because they need that well-developed leaf litter and good structure and cover to give them a little bit of protection from predators. But I think, at this point in time, we've got one population on an island that's doing very well, on Bald Island, just off the coast of Chain Beach. And to date, we actually haven't had any joy in establishing birds outside of this part of the world. But in a predator-free fire, not dry, the frequent loss of vegetation, and a climate that stays moist and damp, there's certainly lots of other potential sites that we could look at. But they're not that easy to translate, Grant. It's a challenge.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute or two. Western Whipbird. What's the state of play with the Western Whipbird, and what are the pressures and the limiting factors for that one?
The Western Whipbird's an interesting one. The genetics has recently been done for the species across its range, so knowing that they're found in South Australia as well.
And Victoria now.
And Victoria, yeah. And it looks like the two western subspecies will actually be combined. It hasn't actually happened yet, but they are doing really well in areas like the Fitzgerald River National Park, the Stirlings, the areas that are unburnt. We've got really good monitoring data from that recently, and then around Waichinukup and Many Peaks. And then they're popping up from time to time across the coast as well between those reserves. And they're also, quite interestingly, doing really well in the Fitz-Stirling, which is the Gondwana link area between the Fitzgerald River National Park and the Stirlings. And they've been recorded in some of the restoration landscapes out there, which is pretty exciting too. So the re-veg areas. Yeah,
forgive me looking down. I'm just comparing my two bird books that we were talking about, the Western in the show about the rediscovering of the white-bellied summers in Victoria. Yep. But I'm just trying to see if you mentioned two Western populations. Yep. I can't see them being distinguished or differentiated in the book. So how far apart are those two populations?
So there was a Phodes nigrogularis, which was the bird that was the sort of Two People's Bay Many Peaks, and then that was the heath whipbird, and then the mallet, which is the Fitz and the Stirlings and all of the other wheat belt reserves. So that was a subspecies differentiation, that's been resolved now, but the taxonomy takes a while to catch up, and the listing.
So by resolve, they're being lumped into the one. Okay.
Yeah, but they're still
distinct populations, though.
Yeah, very much, and they're still a pretty good indicator. They seem to be quite sensitive to fire and fire regimes, and they do have limited dispersal capacity. They don't fly huge distances. They need to be able to get from A to B in terms of dispersing. But we have had them popping up outside the known range occasionally. It's a bit like Victoria, but not quite as exciting. And I think having them in re-veg is actually really exciting, knowing that you can put plants back and they'll appear. Yeah.
That was going to be my next question. How closely linked are they to a very specific habitat type? Are they as linked to the vegetation type, that the vegetation community, as the noisy scrubbird?
No, they seem to be quite adaptable, so long as the structures they're in very thick heath around Two People's Bay and Many Peaks, and more mallee heath as you move out into the drier areas. Yeah.
Okay. Western bristlebirds. That was the next one that you want to talk about. Now, I know virtually nothing about the Western bristlebird, and the Eastern bristlebird is one of my bogey birds, the number of times I've gone looking for it and I've heard it but never seen it. So tell us about the Western Bristlebird. Where is it occurring and what's the state of play in the conservation status of it?
So Western Bristlebirds, again, in two quite disjunct populations. So Two People's Bay, Many Peaks, Waichinukup is one locale, and then in the Fitzgerald River National Park. And they're actually another one that the call gives them away. You often hear them before you see them, and they've got a beautiful call, which in the Fitz is often associated with a trill, and then occasionally we might hear that in the Western population. We do a little bit with bristlebirds and fire. There's been some great work done by Chappelle McNee from BirdLife and Alan Burbidge on and Brenda Newby on trying to understand the relationship between fire and bristlebirds in the Fitz. And that's sort of become quite relevant to the management in the Two People's Bay area, with some fairly significant bushfires there in the last 7 years, including on Mount Gardner, which was actually a fairly intense bushfire. So we've got two different rainfall patterns in the two areas, even though they're only about 300 kilometres apart. It's much wetter on Mount Gardner. And, the bristlebirds seem to be recovering from the fire a lot quicker in the wetter areas than they do in the Fitz, where the vegetation takes a lot longer to regrow and have that structural complexity that's so important. And I think one of the things that we're really keen to do is look at bristlebirds going forward in terms of what recovery actions we can do to improve their status. They're cryptic. It's quite a lot of work in surveying them. We've recently been doing some work with AUs, or autonomous recording units, trying to increase our understanding of calling patterns. And hopefully in the future we'll go back to translocating them back into historical habitat as well. But it's sort of, with the recovery team, the priorities in the last few years have definitely been ground parrots and scrub birds because of what's been happening with those populations.
With the bristlebird, tell us a bit about their lifestyle. They're territorial. Do they pair up? Do they pair for life? And have you got any idea of how large a territory is? Fill us in a little bit about what you know about them.
We've probably got a lot of unanswered questions. The bristlebirds, there's a lot still to learn. They do occupy territorial areas, and there appears to be what we call an A and a B calling bird in any one territorial area, and they're quite easy to define. You can go back to them from year to year and record whether a bird's present or not. Whether it's only two birds is a question. When we were doing some translocation work a few years ago, we were monitoring after we'd taken birds out to try and re-establish a new population, and there seemed to be more than two birds in some of those areas. So it's quite likely that they're more social family groups, but they're certainly very much in the same areas and occupying the same space. And that's highly variable depending on where you are, which population you're looking at. So there's been some quite nice work done historically on Mount Gardner, looking at the area occupied by bristlebirds and how that changes over time. But they're still relatively small territories, and it'd be good to repeat some of that in the Fitz.
So when you mentioned that there was an A and a B bird calling, that prompts a question for me. Do you know whether that's two males, like a dominant male and maybe an offspring that hasn't been chased out yet, or is it a male and a female pair?
The assumption is it's a male and a female, but it's really just that. It's an assumption, but it's definitely a response. You have an A call, you might have 4 or 5, and then you'll get a B call. So it's a shame I can't do bird calls because they're quite lovely to listen to.
And I didn't look up today, but I think when we first started talking about having this chat, I think I was looking for some calls to play, and I think they were restricted on Xeno.
We can share them, Grant.
So,
I think
because I totally get why they are restricted. You don't want people going out there and going, "Oh, wouldn't it be great? I could sell a bristlebird if I can."
Yeah. Catching them is not that easy.
Let's just round off the sort of behavioural lifestyles of the bristlebirds. About how big? Have you got an idea of what kind of area a bristlebird pair will occupy?
Generalising, no.
Yeah.
But in the Two People's Bay area, maybe 8 to 12 hectares for a pair or a family group, if that's what they are. Yeah. But that's highly variable as well, depending on where they are.
Quality of habitat and of course. But
yeah.
So there is scope to build that population if all the efforts are successful to, one, control fire in the long term so that you don't have that rapidly repeating burning cycle, and removing predators. Are cats a real major pressure on the birds?
Interestingly, the stomach contents that we've looked at from Two People's Bay, Many Peaks and the Fitz, there's been no evidence of bristlebirds, but that kind of makes sense when you think that they're inherently rare in any way. It's not like they're common, whereas we have actually found scrubbird feathers in cat stomachs. So, that quite possibly is a post-fire loss of structure and cover issue. But, certainly haven't found any sign of bristlebirds yet. But it's highly likely that they're vulnerable. They occupy the same niche as birds that we do find. So it's quite likely just their low numbers mean they're less likely to be predated by cats. So cat management's important.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk a bit about how the recovery efforts are coordinated or run, for want of probably a better term. So we keep talking about recovery teams.
Yep.
And let's talk about what function the recovery team has and how it plugs into government, which has the power to make changes and allocate money, but into the interested groups, the friends groups and whatnot, who are a link with the activated and involved members of the community, and then that awareness function that has to happen so that you get more people interested, more support and external fundraising.
Yeah.
And then the research component too, because you've got the institutions like universities and BirdLife and whatnot, which are not government but might be being supported by government. Tell us how the recovery teams that you're involved with work, how they're comprised, and just generally tell us everything, Sarah.
That's just so open-ended, Grant. So if we just focus on the 4 species that we've been talking about, originally there was actually a recovery team for ground parrots and a recovery team for scrubbirds, and they amalgamated in the 1990s because the same group of people would have been going to every meeting, and there was a recognition that the birds actually occupied the same habitat types, the same areas across the South Coast. And so what we have now is a South Coast Threatened Birds recovery team that focus on those 4 species. And that's very much a partnership between the department and departmental staff from all aspects of the different divisions, the group that are responsible for fire, the group that are responsible for predator management, the science, the doers on the ground, and then really strong input from BirdLife, Friends of the Western Ground Parrot, community, so that you've got a group that actually is not necessarily just government, but involves all the stakeholders that are able to discuss and provide that expertise into the management and the recovery of those species, and then provide recommendations for implementation of that work through the department process and seek support from funding. So having those sort of independent people there makes it a much more cohesive group, and we have some phenomenal minds in terms of their understanding of species ecology and biology, and we review things and discuss and debate what the right course of action is. And that's certainly been the same since in the 20 odd years that I've been involved with that group. So things like the decision to tackle feral cats was one that came out of the recovery team, and then we sought support from throughout the department to look at incorporating cat baiting into our management in an experimental framework, with ground parrots very much as a vision, ground parrot recovery on the horizon. And that was actually driven by the recovery team initially. as one of we need to stop this decline in ground parrots. What are we going to do this? And we debated and threw ideas around. And even though we didn't really know, we thought our best bet was tackling cats. Similarly, working towards translocation after the fires and all of those sorts of things are discussed at the recovery team meeting, and they review everything, and then we take the recommendations up through the department to actually have things start happening.
Translocations are often controversial because, for one of the main reasons that you're not you, but in generally, it's taking perhaps birds or animals from a healthy, self-sustainable or self-sustaining population and moving them to a different site where either there may be none already or that there may be a small population, which may bring stresses with territory, battles or whatever, who knows. There's a whole lot of things that might happen. How hard are the conversations that need to be had, and how hard is it to make a decision to do translocation?
That's a really good question. I think one of the things that we've had to struggle with, certainly from a ground parrot perspective, is this idea that post 2012, we literally had all of our birds or our eggs in one basket, in one population east of Albany, fire-prone environment, really susceptible to lightning strikes, hard to get to for fire suppression activity. And in 2015, we had 2 big bushfires, one in October, one in November, and we were in the park in between those 2 fires. And when we looked at the available ground parrot habitat post-fire, we'd lost over 80% of the potential habitat, and then you've lost your structure and your complexity. Your roosting, nesting habitat becomes way too open. And so even though we'd been hammered by fire, we were still thinking we actually need to have these birds in more than one place for security. And so then the question becomes, is there a place that has appropriate habitat, the same food resources, is free of the predators or minimal predator activity, and that we can actually manage fire and other processes? And for the South Coast Threatened Birds Recovery Team, that was something that took several years to actually develop those concepts. We worked with some of our partners from the tertiary organisation looking at climate change modelling and using that as a framework to pick potential candidate sites. And then we went in and worked out how effective our management could be, looked at the floristics of those sites and whether there were suitable resources for the birds, and then what can we actually do about cats and foxes in those areas. So it's a big challenge. But if you don't take the risk, then every little patch of unburnt habitat could also be lost in that year. And we were also monitoring the source population fairly closely to work out how many birds we might be able to take out. And it is challenging.
It's a risk-reward calculation that needs to be made, and people need to understand that there is a risk in it. Now, often what goes on with the management of species that are so limited in distribution, small, maybe getting to that stage of being genetically too limited, captive breeding is often running along the management of the wild population and efforts to either reintroduce or translocate. So have you got captive breeding going for any of these species? Scrubbirds
captive breeding was attempted in the very early stages of the recovery program, and that wasn't successful. In the mid-2000s, we started talking about whether it might be something that we could do with ground parrots, and that was that was our second stopgap to try and make sure that we didn't lose a species. And
so you just maintaining an insurance population was the main reason there?
Yeah, and at that point we actually didn't know whether they could be kept in captivity. So that was the first question, and very much the focus of the initial years of having a few birds in captivity was to work out the husbandry and whether ground parrots actually did okay in aviaries. And then more recently that program has been shifted to the Perth Zoo, and they're doing a lot of work to try and figure out if they can actually be bred in captivity. At this point they've had some promising behaviours, but they've only got a small number of birds, so not successful yet. So our preference from a translocation perspective was to actually look at whether we could do a wild-to-wild translocation, which is what we've been focused on for the last couple of years.
Yes, so what we learned from that is that we can't assume that a captive breeding program will either increase the population or maintain it. So if you're taking birds from the wild to put into a captive breeding program that isn't increasing the numbers, then the obvious choice is it better to remove birds from a wild population into a suitable habitat where there are no wild birds rather than bringing them into an aviary to have a punt. They're both punts.
They're both punts. And I think one of the things with the captive program is that we have learnt an incredible amount about ground parrots from having those birds in the zoo, and it's actually been really valuable to us as field ecologists, the knowledge that's come out of that. We're still optimistic that they may have some success in breeding them in captivity, but in terms of spreading the risk of losing all of our ground parrots with bushfire, we've actually been confident that our management in Cape Arid has slowed the decline. We've actually seen some really positive evidence that we're doing a good job with cats in the presence of fire. So a wild-to-wild translocation was the logical thing to do. So that was a 3-year project.
Can we talk about that a bit more in a minute? But can I get you to tell us what are the really important things that you've learned from having the ground parrots in captivity?
I think there's been a remarkable sort of development in the understanding of the mate feeding and the way that they socialise and interact with each other. And the zoo staff have got some pretty phenomenal CCTV where they can actually observe what the birds are doing pretty much all the time, or as much time as they have, and just looking at how the birds relate to each other, how important the native food plants are for them. They eat seeds and flowers and fruits, and they actually have a delivery of plants from the bush, from the south coast regularly. And even though they've got a fantastic supply of locally grown food plants, that pick that comes from the bush down here is really important. And we've got a lot more sense of the husbandry skills. The zoo have just learnt a lot about what you need to do to keep these birds alive in captivity and healthy. We've learnt a lot about the diseases that may be an issue, and some of those things are ubiquitous in the natural environment but become more of a stressor when they come into captivity. So, yeah, I think it's been a really valuable program. And then things like calling activity and just things like the way that the males interact with the females and interact with each other. Without that high level of observation, you'd never pick up those sorts of behaviours.
Can you tell us how long individuals are being maintained in captivity? Have you got an idea whether there's a significantly shorter lifespan or a longer lifespan for the birds in captivity? Has it been going long enough for you to know that?
I don't think we really know. We don't really have a sense of lifespan in the wild because obviously we're not tracking animals over time. We do have a couple of individuals that have been in the captive program for just over 10 years, and they're really healthy. But you'd expect them to be reasonably long-lived birds anyway.
Yeah. So that's quite promising, isn't it? That if the zoo staff, the aviculturists who are in this program are able to unlock the key to get successful breeding happening, that means that the recruitment potential of one or two pairs is pretty good because they're quite long-lived birds that so far. We don't know if they're going to be like kakapo or something where they're living 60, 70 years, but you know that getting perhaps 6 to 10 breeding seasons out of a pair is feasible, even though it hasn't happened yet. But that could lead to the recruitment of maybe 20, 30 individuals over that period from one pair.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so it has enormous potential. Yeah. And I think just like I said, that knowledge of the husbandry and the basic ecology that's come out of having birds under such close observation has been invaluable.
Are they very choosy about what they eat in the wild? Can you give us an idea of some of the key plants that they eat?
I guess in ground parrot habitat, we know that we've got a really diverse mix of sedges and grasses, flowering plants, so a lot of the proteaceae and the melaleucas, and then things like the peas that have seed pods. All of what we know about the ground parrot diet in the wild has come from a single study of a bird in the mid-2000s that was followed around and videoed feeding. And one of the amazing women who's worked with ground parrots for a long time, Brenda Newby, actually sat down with that video and documented every flower and fruit and seed that it visited. And so that's given us the basis of what we understand, and then extrapolating that out to where we know we find birds, floristically rich low heaths, which are probably a bit like a candy shop for the birds, and then taking the food from those environments and sending it up to Perth and having the zoo staff in the field with us looking at those food plants, we've got a much better handle of what they might like. Yeah, but there's a lot more work to do in that space too.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of genera, and they were generally woody fruits that you were mentioning. From an East Coast bias here, I was wondering what I would have thought that you'd be talking about maybe lamandras and garnias and then minnows, danthonias, more like the tufty, grassy things.
Yeah, that's the sedges. So the murmurs and the anarthrias, and they're the sedges. The woody fruited species like the proteaceae, it's actually the flowers that they tend to go with.
So they're eating the flowers. Perhaps they're getting a sugar hit, and that was what I was thinking. And have you got the spermum cases and kunzias and whatnot that they're chowing down on as well?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, certainly the kunzias and the melaleucas, they'll often chew the seeds, chew the fruits on those. And then the divesias, a lot of the peas here, they might have large green fruity pods with a nice green seed inside. So, yeah, they seem to get stuck into those as well. So, yeah, it's quite diverse.
Yeah, so that's promising that they're not so linked to a specific food source. It's the structure of the habitat that is important rather than the specific makeup of the floral community. So that's
absolutely
that's really something I hadn't really thought about before.
For the Western Ground Parrot, historically they were known as swamp parrots, because a lot of the habitat was associated with swampy areas, which is actually what we've had around Waichinukup and Chains Beach, whereas in Cape Arid they're very much in the low heath on the Sandplain country and in the Fitzgerald River National Park. So, yeah, quite variable, but it's all based on there being adequate food resources.
And I guess that idea that the swampy nature of them, if that's more desirable, that tends to indicate that if the predators can be under control, there might be much more habitat which is suitable for them that they're currently not in. So that's promising as well, isn't it? But
there's loads of potential habitat, and we frequently get reports of ground parrots, and we're very keen to follow up on those. They usually tend to be rock parrots or elegant parrots that people have seen, but there's right the way around the southwest and up to north of Perth, there's loads of potential habitat.
Those two Neophema parrots that you've just mentioned, are they significant competitors, do you think, or do they occupy different niches?
Yes, different niches, and while there's a general overlap, we don't usually see those in the core areas that are occupied by the ground parrots.
Cheers, Peter. I've just put Peter's comment up. I couldn't resist because he said it's a great chat, and of course,
that's lovely. I'm just getting my water bottle.
Tell us what you're studying. I'm interested. He said he's got to go back and study, and of course, you can always catch the replay and whatnot, Peter. So let's kick it around a little bit, Sarah, about what do you think the future holds? Are you confident that a real concentration on cat eradication can make a significant difference over the broader landscape in southwest and Western Australia? I think absolutely. It's what we need to be focusing on, and I think that's been one of the really exciting things
about the work that we've been doing for the last 15 years now. We're trying to include feral cat management into the work that we're doing for the birds, but now we're seeing that expanding out into a general community awareness. You're smiling.
Yeah, I'm smiling because, I knew as a kid in the mid-70s and early 80s what a threat feral cats were to birds and native animals.
Yeah.
How is it taking this long for governments to actually go, maybe we should do something about cats? Now, do you think it's because of that issue that we touched on a little bit, that people are really reluctant to take the cat community on? And look, I'm far more antagonistic and prepared to go bulldoze into something. But are there less votes in caring about native birds and animals? Are there less votes to win if you are proactive and positive on that side than there are to lose by going, cats have to be desexed, they have to be kept enclosed in your yard? What's your feeling? Because you're in the space, right? You're dealing with this all the time, where I'm just looking at it from, bloody hell, there's another bloody cat outside the park.
I guess it's really part of that increased appreciation and understanding of the value of our native species. And maybe some of us have not articulated just the level of impact as well as we could have. All the recent efforts, some fantastic work being done around the country, just highlighting how significant that impact has been. It probably wasn't so much in the public, in your face, so to speak, before that. And I think that's actually quite sobering when you think so many people have been aware of the issue, but how do we actually tackle that as a community? And the more that people value our native species and birds, and the more we're likely to get people on board, which is why some of the work that's happening around, certainly today and around our patch, is so exciting, because it's not just a problem for government. It's actually a problem for society.
And we can't everyone's problem.
It's everyone's problem. We can't put fences up around every special patch of bush. We don't want to put fences up around every special patch of bush. We just need people living around there to understand that if they've got cats, they need to be kept inside.
And while that exclusion fencing in areas is important, if that's the go-to solution all the time, that means people say, okay, the problem isn't that we've got all these cats running around everywhere. That's not really a problem, because we can solve it by doing this. And predator exclusion zones is not the solution. It's a stopgap measure to mean that we don't lose stuff in the meantime.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a lot of the animals that are contained within those zones, they need to move. It's not a solution for the long term or for the broad scale in the landscape.
No, that's right. And I think, like, you've just hit it on the head, it's a stopgap, but it's not a longer term solution. And when you're thinking about birds like Passoporus, the genus, fences aren't a good thing.
Because you want them to disperse. You certainly don't want two mature territorial males stuck, or let's say 20, in an area they can't escape.
No.
Whether they kill each other directly is one thing, but the stress levels is going to be very high, which means that any recruitment is probably going to be lessened. You're actually damaging your own efforts. So, we have to have so many different solutions that are available. Now, Sarah, let's whiz through some of these photographs and you can tell us what's happening and where they are and who's who in the zoo, so to speak. So let's have a look at this one first.
Wow. Okay. That's taking a step back to around probably 2014. And this is part of the mob that we're passionate about ground parrot conservation, but also tackling the feral cat issue. From back, Lucy Saul Cowan, Jeff Pinder, Andy Chapman, John Pridham. And we actually, in the 2012 to 2016, we actually worked outside the region with Dave Algar and other colleagues on feral cat work on Fortescue Marsh. And this was one of those days where we got caught out by rain and ended up looking like we'd been rolling around in the mud. But we were tackling the feral cat issue both on the south coast and up on the marsh, and that actually allowed us to keep a team of people employed for a solid 5-year project, which was pretty amazing. And so we'd go up there and in the winter and then be working down here from spring through to autumn. So, yeah, a great team of people and a privilege to work with them and the many others. I quite like this picture because it's really nice to get grubby at work.
Yeah, I was going to say there's some grubby faces and whatnot there. But it begs the question, the comments you were just making there, that was a 5-year project.
Yep.
Now, can you tell us what is the state of play in that area now with cats? Has the good work or have the results of the good work been maintained?
I think so. I think the Pilbara region and in partnership with the mining companies up there have continued with the cat work on the marsh. And I think I guess the marsh is a really significant area for birds, which is why it was nice for us to be doing cat stuff, but also being aware of the significance of the area for birds. And given the importance of that ecosystem for some of the migratory birds and waders, it's actually pretty important to keep up the cat work. And yeah, that's still being managed through the Pilbara region. So we don't do quite as much up there now, but
that's good, because the point of the question was that there needs to be continuity of funding and continuity of the management needs to keep going. Otherwise, you have a 3-year project, you do a whole lot of good work, and then everyone packs up and goes home, and then 10 years later, it's all been finished. Okay, let's have a look at this shot.
Oh, wow. So that's with filmmaker Janine Riggs, who has worked with us on a number of projects, including tracking us through ground parrot efforts for many years, and she did a little documentary. And on the right-hand side is a volunteer, George Shetzoff, who has also been involved in scrub bird work and ground parrot work. And then Dion Atba, myself, and Darcy Martin, who's another inspiring young ecologist that works with us. And we were actually on Bald Island catching scrub birds. So that's actually Bald Island, which is 800 odd hectares just off Chain Beach. And scrub birds were translocated there in 1992 as part of the efforts to secure the species. And they've done remarkably well over there.
Do you have a population estimate for now on Bald Island?
Yeah, there's around 150 territorial males, so, between 400 and 450 birds probably, which is quite interesting because when they were first translocated, the Alan Danks, who's been one of my mentors and was actually my boss for quite a while, they had estimated that the island could support maybe 30 territorial males. And what we've seen on Bald Island, which is a breeding site for great-winged petrels, lots of really productive ecosystems, different vegetation communities where the seabirds are nesting, is the scrub bird numbers just went through the roof over there. And so you can't really go anywhere on the island and not hear that beautiful territorial call. It's quite a remarkable place, and also home to an island population of quokkas. And in the last 15 years, Gilbert's Potteroo have been translocated there as well. So it's a fabulous place.
So I really have to ask, are there other candidate islands that you could be looking at to put other birds maybe that are genetically quite different, so that you can have, if possible, when you do reintroductions, you can have very distantly related birds rather than possibly quite closely related birds?
Yeah, look, we've actually got a couple of other islands that we flagged as having potential for scrub birds. And Saul, who was in that previous picture, actually did his PhD looking at the genetics of scrub birds. And yeah, he's the one with the cheeky grin up the back. And
this one?
I can't
see.
Oh,
no, the yellow wearing a cap? Yellow?
No, behind
shirt.
The orange shirt. No,
behind you. The one I
first so Saul actually looked at the genetics of scrub bird translocations, and certainly the selection of birds for Bald Island in the 90s turned out to be quite fortuitous because they hadn't actually lost a lot of heterozygosity in that shift of what was a very small number of founders. But certainly if we were going to be looking at other islands, we've got a much information base to be managing the genetics of the population now. We did actually try a translocation to Mondrain Island in the Recherche Archipelago. So That's southeast of Esperance, and it's the same geology and fantastic vegetation, and we looked at the leaf litter invertebrates and found that there was good food resources there. But we had a fire on the island just before the translocation, and we decided... I was going to say we decided to go ahead because there was an area of unburnt vegetation that would be fairly suitable, but then we went into a drying spell for a couple of years and that appears not to have succeeded. So at the moment we've just got them on Bald Island.
Well, it might surprise you. Maybe someone will head out there and find some. That might be...
Yeah, it'll be pretty exciting. Yeah.
Now, what have we got here? People doing work. What's happening here?
So... These are Dion again with the Nanup Music Festival and a couple of our other volunteers that have helped with the ground parrot translocation work. So this was 2021, so this was the first wild-to-wild translocation, and we're fortunate enough to have some incredible volunteers helping with that work, including a number of A-class banders. So Nick in the purple raincoat is actually a highly skilled bander, and then Larice and Marie, volunteers that have been with us for a few years helping with recovery work. And they're actually both started as students that arrived from Bristol University in 2019 and they're still helping with the project.
Okay. And it's really great that people from all over the world get to go to different places and be involved in conservation and research work because it spreads the knowledge. It's really
That's good. Right. Yeah, and one of the things that we do when we're catching ground parrots, so we're using mist nets to catch ground parrots, and we do get quite a lot of bycatch. And so one of the things that we do in the morning sessions is we try and develop skills in banding, in bird banding. So we've actually that's actually a licensed project as part of the bigger recovery program. And so these guys are actually getting the skills in handling and banding birds.
And this is a morning session? I was going to ask whether it was morning or dusk because everyone's got their headlamps on.
Yeah, so this would have been the morning session. So we would have been out on our mist net lines around an hour and a half, 2 hours before sunrise. And then we actually unfurl the nets in the dark and sit on the nets while the ground parrots are flying from their roosting areas to their feeding area. Yeah, it looks like it's pretty cold.
And you took that shot?
Yeah.
Okay. So what do we got next?
So this is actually just an example of the number of people involved in the team. And this was in 2018 when we were actually doing some telemetry of birds in Cape Parrot. So we were catching a couple of birds for Perth Zoo and also doing some telemetry of birds released back into the wild. And so this just gives you an idea of the number of people involved. So Nick's got the same jacket on, even though it's 4 years earlier. And then, the project team, we've got people from the Friends of the Western Ground Parrot there, Perth Zoo staff, volunteers, and some other really amazing A-class banders. And then I should point out Alan Danks is on the left-hand side. So he's one of the legends that I get to work with. And Alan Burbage is in the middle with the beard. Yeah, and just an amazing group of people, still smiling after 20 days in a field camp in the middle of Cape.
Now, I was going to ask you about the tent. So you've just given me the answer. So for 20 days, you've been living in tents. Yeah. I was going to ask whether the tent was where you actually do the processing of any birds that are caught, or are they processed where the nets are to reduce stress?
So what we've realised with the capture work is that the presence of zoo staff, including a vet and somebody with some husbandry skills, makes a huge difference. And we actually have, for all of our capture work in recent years, we've actually had a dedicated zoo space. And so they have a holding tent or vehicle, because it can get a bit windy for tents in Cape Parrot. And then there's a processing tent, which is basically a clean, hygienic environment. There's a tent that has the TV to watch birds while they're in the temporary holding facilities. And that's part of our field camp.
So let's talk about that process. So the mist nets are up and the birds are entangled and then they're removed. So what are they then put into? So I'm just trying to work out how many times they're handled and then what is actually done, because I'm guessing they're weighed, or they're identified and recorded, weighed, banded, if not banded, already.
Okay.
And is there feathers taken, or is there blood work taken, and is there a fecal swab? Let's talk about exactly what happens when you process.
So I should point out that the process has been refined and had lots of review and
obviously
revision.
trial and error, and you find out what needs to be done and maybe what's stressful and what doesn't need to be done.
And that's basically what we're trying to do, is absolutely minimise the stress. So when a bird is extracted from the net, it goes straight into a holding box rather than a bag.
Now, is it dark or is it open-fronted?
No, it's dark. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's dark. It has a selection of food in there, native local food, but not loads of stuff, just enough to give it some footing and something to nibble on if it wants to. That bird's then transferred back to the holding facility, which could be 20 kilometres away from camp, and then it goes straight under the observation of the keeper, the husbandry expertise from the zoo, and often there'll be heat lamps and a small camera goes in just so that any concerns can be flagged then. And then once they're happy, once the zoo staff are happy, the bird's processed, and that's all done on an individual basis based on an assessment of how the bird is, and the objective is to minimise the handling time. So you can get things like fecal samples out of the carry boxes, and they're pretty useful. Yeah. And then we will band them, especially for the translocation. It's important that they're banded. And then the health check, the health screening, the morphometrics, any feather, small feather, body feathers, and if the bird's not stressed, then we will take blood.
Now, morphometrics, let's just pretend I don't know what that means. Is that where you put a caliper on the beak and the back of the skull or something like that?
Yep, that's right. Yep. Head length, bill length and width, and a wing length. And that actually, there is a slight difference between males and females, but those morphometric measurements actually do cluster quite nicely into male-female.
And perhaps age as well, maybe.
Yeah, so age is something that we can usually do on the plumage, and if we have a young bird, primary coverts will be quite different to the older birds, and then we can actually have a look for wear, signs of wear and tear. Occasionally you'll get birds that are looking pretty ratty. It just depends a bit on the time of the year that we're catching them. So that's done in an enclosed space, minimal number of people. We take a few photos, and then the birds go into a larger holding box, which is beautifully decorated or fitted out with native food plants and water and a seed mix. And then they're kept under observation until they're transferred to their new home. And that's where having that veterinary expertise and husbandry expertise gives us the ability to just keep focusing on what we're doing, and if there's anything that is of concern, that gets flagged.
Now, there's always trial and error with those things. It's been going for a reasonable amount of time. Now, they're never 100% successful, and there's stress on birds, and some birds react well or don't. I'm assuming that there's been some casualties in this. What has happened, and have you been able to work out what are the most stressful of these activities, and what have you changed because of that?
Yeah, so we actually have had a few injuries, and I guess it's worth remembering that ground parrots have been caught in mist nets since the 1980s, and we realised when we brought the first birds into captivity in 2009, 2010, how important it was to soften the aviaries because they're such strong flyers. Obviously, you can't have them flying into things, but there actually seems to be an issue with the coracoid joint, which is something that is quite odd and seems to be specific to the Western Pizzoporus. Yeah. We've spoken to people over east and they've never seen this problem.
Is that a leg or a neck? Or?
No, it's basically
shoulder.
Think of that, that from the scapula.
It's a bit like the clavicle.
Yeah, and there's just a small little joint that seems to be quite weak, and whether that's stressed by the angle that they hit a net or we don't know, but we've actually been very aware of it being an issue.
Is it repairable if a bird, is it a dislocation or a break?
It actually appears to be a break that can actually cause issues with the lungs underneath.
Okay.
And so it's in the birds that we've had an issue with is it has expressed differently in the different situations. And one of the things that we've realised is that we probably we have tried using different gauge mist nets to try and soften the impact when a bird comes into a net, and then being very aware of it. And this is part of, I mentioned before, we now have as a standard, it's only an A-class bander, somebody who's really familiar with handling birds, that gets ground parrots out of a net.
Yeah.
So everybody else learns to do a bit of a holding pattern if a bird hits a net in front of them. And so that means that it's actually people who are quite experienced with handling birds, very experienced with handling birds, that are actually getting them out of a net. And we actually didn't have any injuries in our recent capture effort. So we're constantly trying to improve. And I guess it's one of those things that you learn once you start to be engaged with catching birds. Things present like this coracoid issue that we just never thought would be a problem. But we have had one bird that's had a coracoid fracture that is actually still alive and in the zoo.
Oh, that was going to be my next question. If you do get a bird that suffers a mishap of some sort, that they could join the captive population and hopefully survive and live out a good quality of life, rather than being left to die an awful death in the bush.
That's right. And absolutely. And that's one of the important things about having such a great multidisciplinary team. We all have expertise in different areas, and when we do have a problem, we're able to talk about it as a group. And having that support from the zoo staff has just been phenomenal. And there are options at the zoo, and anything like that creates another learning experience. We learn more about ground parrot when they head in that direction.
And something that we should point out, that before any of those things are done, there's a whole ethical clearance procedure that you've all got to go through to be sure that that the work is worthwhile, important, and as safe as possible for the birds. Now, you mentioned before telemetry. This is telemetry, right?
Yeah, that's telemetry from the ground. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So we haven't talked about birds having harnesses or collars or tags.
Yeah.
Have you been harnessing or birds in the wild?
Yeah. So this is actually one of our colleagues from Esperance, and she's tracking a bird in ground parrot habitat in Cape Arid. So you get a nice idea of the structure of that vegetation, and you can see how much is flowering.
No myoporums in
there's a eucalypt just to her left, and then the white flowers are the lysonemas, so the curry plants that are flowering through there. Yeah, it's really pretty. But she's actually tracking a bird that has a harness on, so we've used harnesses with ground parrots, and that's based on the idea that they'll actually be a weak link, or they will rot and the birds can actually chew them off if they need to. Yeah, and it's quite interesting. A lot of buyers of these transmitters say, oh, you can't put them on parrots because they'll just chew them, but ground parrots are actually pretty happy with a transmitter on their back, and they will get rid of it if they want to, but it gives us even 2 or 3 weeks of data is incredibly valuable, especially when you're translocating birds to a new area. So the bird that Em's tracking there had a combination of a VHF and a GPS logger on it, and this actually turned out to be quite fortuitous because these birds were released in 2018, and we had a huge bushfire in January 2019, and all of that habitat that she's in was burnt, and it was quite a high intensity fire. So we actually had 5 birds with transmitters on before the fire, and they were doing quite well, and then we had the fire, and we managed to relocate 3 of those after the fire, which was quite interesting to see what they did. 2 of them we disappeared. We didn't see them again. But yeah, so we had one bird fly around 20 k's to the nearest patch of long unburnt habitat, which was pretty cool.
So that raises other questions, doesn't it? Like, did that bird already know where that patch of habitat was? Or do they fly well enough and get enough altitude to know? Or
I don't know, Grant. But these are the things that we don't know, but they're fascinating when we find them out.
Yeah, that's why every time you answer a question, there's usually another question that pops up.
Yeah, at least one.
Okay, let's have a look at the moment when a couple of them get a new home.
Yeah, so this is the translocation in 2021, and in this picture is the wonderful Abby Berryman on the left, who's done loads of work with scrub birds and ground parrots. Helena Stokes, who was a BirdLife project officer working as one of our team. So she's actually been sitting in the same office until she left for a permanent position with AWC recently. And then the legs belong to Paul Watteen, who's the chair of the Friends of the Western Ground Parrot. And we were talking about improving things and learning. So you can see these birds, this bird actually has a transmitter on. So this has a VHF and a GPS transmitter. And this was the first wild-to-wild translocation. And we did things very similarly to how we've done grub bird translocations over the years, where you have somebody letting a bird out of the box. And these birds flew quite well and ended up dispersing quite widely. And one of the things that we thought may have been responsible for that was human presence at the release. So one of our team, Mark, has actually developed a new opening door, and that's actually opened remotely like a garage door. And
okay, so you put the box down, you all nick off,
yep,
press the button, and then it's open, and they can fossick around, they can do what they want before they nick off.
Yeah, with no perceived threat from us being close by. And we've actually got some great footage this year of birds just basically sitting on that flap and then just meandering out into the bush and having a look around, which is pretty cool. Yeah.
It is pretty cool. Now, that's a mist net.
That's correct. That's a mist net furled. So that would be after a morning netting session. And this gives you an idea of the number of people that we have involved in this work. So Mark, I've mentioned Mark's in the bright orange shirt on the right-hand side. He stands out in the crowd. And I guess if you think about the effort of translocating 7 ground parrots, it was around 7.5 kilometres of mist net established to get that many birds. And that this was actually in June in Cape Arid National Park. We were really fortunate that we had a small break in weather to actually allow us to get out there and get these birds. But it's a huge effort.
Yeah, definitely.
And most of those people are volunteers representing class banders, just general volunteers, and a few BirdLife staff in there, which was great to have.
And was that taken from someone standing on a hill, or did you have a drone?
That's from the drone, yeah. Yeah, actually, I think Dion, who's the tall guy next to the mist net pole, actually has the controller in his hand.
Oh, in his hand. Okay, that's what he's done. Yeah. And here we are.
Isn't he beautiful?
That's bird number M02.
Yeah.
Do you give them pet names? Is that Fred?
No, not at all. I think some people like to give them names, and I've been involved in scrub bird translocations since 1999, and we had a few years where we had lots of birds named, but we just use numbers now. Yeah. So he's the second male caught in 2018, and he's a very healthy bird.
It does look quite fit and healthy. So what's on the drawing board now, Sarah? Let's talk about ground parrots first.
Yep.
What's the next step that you think the recovery activities need to take?
We're still doing a lot of work in the cat management space. We've just come back from some post-baiting trapping, which is something that we do as a matter of course now as part of trying to manage cats in parrot habitat. We're monitoring the translocation still, and certainly the signs are very good that the first 2 years have been successful, and so hopefully we'll complete the 3rd year of that translocation next year and then let them get on with things, continuing the predator management around that site, and then continuing to think about the monitoring, tracking what's happening with the population in Cape Arid and Neutzland, as well as the translocation site. And we're monitoring the predators as well, so we can't take our finger off the pulse. We've had some big wins. We need to keep
If we talk about monitoring the predators, have you got some comparison data of the population density of the cats now compared to maybe 5 or 10 years ago?
Yeah, absolutely, when we started. Yeah, so we've got a couple of camera track grids that we run out in Cape Arid and Neutzland, and they're actually providing a really good reference to the work that we did in the early 2010, 11, 12 period when we started the baiting out there. But the other thing that's really useful is just looking at the track activity. So seeing how many cats we actually see when we're on the tracks out there, or sign of cats. And we've certainly made a dent. We don't see a lot of track activity. And even the farmers close to the edge of the park have commented on the lack of fox and cat activity. So it's pretty encouraging. We need to maintain that, though. We can't just stop.
This is stuff that needs to continue, or else, like we talked about earlier, one idiot can undo all the good work.
Yeah.
What about things like fairy wrens and maybe bush larks, scrub wrens, all those other kind of birds? Are they seeing increased populations as a result of the control of the cats as well?
We don't have any robust monitoring data for those species, but it's certainly something that we could probably pull some material out of our acoustic monitoring to look at activity. Some of the birds that you'd probably use as surrogates, things like the southern scrub robins and the malleefowl, certainly in the Fitzgerald River National Park, seem to be doing pretty well. And interestingly, we've had malleefowl popping up increasingly in Waichinukup, which is pretty exciting. And I think it's actually quite hard to monitor everything. And I guess that's where some of the work that is done through the recreational birders is really useful when you start to look at bird data and some of those bigger picked patterns. But yeah, we're by necessity just focused very much on the species that we're working with.
Yeah, not that there's not enough for you to do, Sarah.
It's us. It's this amazing team of people who are so passionate about this work. We do see Cape Arrow is just a phenomenal place for seeing fairy terns and waders. If you're there at the right time of year, it's a real treat. And you have to travel quite a long way east to pick up the fairy terns breeding at Point Malcolm. But yeah, that's a significant area. And then we've had huge numbers of hooded plovers and waders, on the lakes, on the salt lakes.
Yeah. It's almost time to finish up, but I mentioned that it can be controversial and there can be a whole lot of pushback with things like translocations and captive breeding. Have you come across a lot of that in these particular programs? And what are the main concerns that people raise about translocations and capturing from the wild to establish insurance populations?
That's a good question. I don't know that I'm actually aware of a lot of criticism of the scrubbird translocation program, and actually that level of intervention, scrubbirds quite possibly wouldn't be here today. And that's a really important lesson. And there's always a risk in taking birds out of a small population. And you mentioned it before, you might actually be disrupting breeding cycles and taking important individuals, but it's about balancing that risk. And I think it's certainly with the ground parrot translocation work, we've done a lot to actually address those concerns, and it was something that has been well reviewed outside the department. The recovery team have had a lot of really valuable input, and I think you get to a point where if you did taking a small number of birds, you're effectively just left managing a population in situ. And when you have these nominal stochastic events, which we're quite used to down here now, your hope starts to fade. And so it's about finding that balance, but then also being able to communicate it and being able to take people along for the ride, I guess. This is all risky business. We've done a lot to bugger things up and we need to try and make things better. And being able to re-establish populations that have disappeared in 2 decades is actually pretty exciting stuff. But we're very aware of the risk of taking too many birds out of a small population, and that's part of our management. And you mentioned before the approvals that we have to go through. So it's all very transparent. But there was a lovely vision that came out of a workshop that we did in 2015, which is about putting the ground parrot or kailoring back into that chorus of birds that people hear right the way along the south coast and further west. And I think that's a nice vision to have and to support.
Certainly can't resist this one.
Go on.
Do you want to get the Worth brothers involved so they can get an insurance pack of genetics so you can reanimate something if it does go extinct?
Who? Grant, I don't turn the telly on very often.
We've got 2 famous actors in Australia who are big news in Hollywood. Chris Hemsworth and his brother Liam. Mm-hmm. And I can't believe this one's got under your radar. They want to Jurassic Park the thylacine. So there's money being put together to do this, right?
Yeah, is that coming out of Hollywood, is it?
Yeah, it's money from people who have made all their money in Hollywood. But, how?
Yeah, my team would support you in your incredulous disbelief. I'm not very good with all of that sort of stuff. I tend to keep my head in a hole. But I think let's just focus on looking after what we've got.
That's right. Let's not lose what we've already got before we start Jurassic Parking things.
Yep, totally agree.
Can you imagine a government saying, yeah, we could buy 40,000 acres of habitat with this money, or we could bring back the thylacine.
Yeah.
And then where are the thylacines going to live at Australia?
Yeah, I don't know. That's one of those conversations that I think needs to be had with a stick in hand.
That's right.
Yeah, but landscape scale recovery and looking after the patches of bush that we've got now and the species that are still extant and have a chance, I think is much easier.
Yeah, that's right. It's easier not to wreck what we've got rather than magic up something that we don't have anymore.
That's right.
That seems to be my situation.
I agree completely.
Yeah. Last thing, we've talked about 4 West Australian birds that need a lot of help. What we had to say, bird number 5, 6 and 7, what would they be from your point of view that really need intensive management and conservation efforts that perhaps aren't getting them already? Because it's a really small pie, right?
Yeah. Look, I think I'm very lucky to also be involved with some of the Australasian bittern work, and that's happening across the country and New Zealand, and some phenomenal work going on. But certainly in the southwest of Western Australia, significant loss of the wetlands that species needs, and I think we need to really see it as a bit of a flagship for healthy wetland ecosystems, and lots more to be done in that space. I love the cockatoos. I just love birds, and I think they're such a good indicator of healthy country and healthy ecosystems. The cockatoos, some of the waders that have that amazing challenge of travelling such big distances, and so much work to be done there. I don't know how much we can influence here, but certainly awareness is a big part of it.
I know we've talked in general terms about doing this again, maybe with some other people involved. So we're way over time or out of time. So I'm going to leave all the standard bird emergency questions that I usually ask everyone until the next time we get there. So that'll give you time to think about what the best bird is, because I know that's a big question, so you can take that away to think about.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a very big question. And I'm glad you told us that you are a birder, because there's a whole lot of bird nerd questions that have to be asked. We just have to ask them. But Sarah, I really want to thank you. It's been a long time coming, and I think we covered an awful lot of ground in this chat. Thanks to the department for letting you off the leash too.
The department let me off the leash quite some time ago. Yeah, I think it's not fair to think that they didn't. But
I just know that often the messages are very controlled and whatnot, which I understand. And thanks to the friends groups and all the volunteers who get involved. And that's right, and make a super.
Yep, it's a huge collaboration.
That's right. And let's go the West Australian feral cat group as well. We've had a chat with as well.
Yeah, no, it's just I can't. I pull cat stomachs apart as part of my study, and I've just been overwhelmed with some of the things I found, and birds in particular. I think it's a real eye opener. So that's where we can make a big difference.
Definitely keep your bloody cats inside. And we can have a much wider ranging bird chat next time.
Yep.
Sarah Comer
thank you.
Been great to talk to you. I'm Grant. I'm a bird nerd. That's Sarah. She's over there. I'm here. Yep. We'll catch you all next time. Thanks very much.
Thanks, man. See ya.